Hey guys, this is Jim, WT1W, and you're watching FEP Labs Radio. Thanks for stopping by. Appreciate it. This is going to be part 2 of our 3-part series of building the DenCo battery kit. This is a DIY LiFePO4 battery sold by AD6DM Dennis on his website, and he sent me one for review, so we're going to put it together, check out the instructions, and make sure everything works and I don't let the smoke out. Let's get to part 2. The first step we really have to do, remove and save somewhere safe the electrical tape over the positive and negative terminals. So that is this tape right here. And what I'm going to do is find a Sharpie, and I'm going to mark the positive and negative terminals, because once I take that tape off, the only way to tell will be to stick a meter on it. And I want to make sure that when I start working on this, that I know exactly which end is which, because obviously they look pretty much identical. All right, I grabbed a Sharpie. We're going to mark these cells so that we know which end is positive and which end is negative. So we're going to remove the electrical tape, and we're going to stick it out of the way where we can retrieve it later and reuse it. All right, that was step 1. Remove and save somewhere safe the yellow Captain tape over the battery pack sides. We're going to reapply this later. Kapton tape is some cool stuff. It has a high resistance to heat, and it's an electrical insulator. All right, so now we have completed step 2. Step 3, Dennis recommends a piece of fine grit sandpaper to lightly score the nickel strip terminal flaps. Nickel strip sides on both the pack positive, pack negative, and bus bar areas in preparation for solder blobs. So he's talking about here and the bus bar, and probably those bus bars as well. And all we're going to do is just grit this up a little bit so that any solder we need to apply will stick better. As I'm roughing these connections up, this is one little nickel strip that is spot welded to the top of the battery. So be aware of that. You need to treat these with a little bit of care, because they are spot welded up there and you have a natural hinge here, and it would be probably pretty easy to bend this back and forth and break this off, and then you have bigger issues. So pay attention to that. All right, so you can see we've scuffed that up a little bit. Step 4, apply solder flux on the nickel strip terminal flaps. These are the nickel strip terminal flaps. The nickel strip side areas on the pack positive, the pack negative, and the bus bar area. So we're going to put flux here, 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 and here, probably some on that. And then what the next step I know is to put solder blobs on the pack positive and pack negative terminal flaps, and then cover that a lot. These will be for the BMS, B minus, and positive output wires. So we're gonna get the soldering iron fired up and goo this up with solder there and there. And this step is step 5, and that's the only thing he wants us to do right now. Okay, Dennis shows here that we're putting it on our flaps, which we did. Next page in our instructions shows putting a blob here, here, and here, which we still need to do, as well as blobs on each of the bus bars. All right, our next step is to take the 3M double-sided tape and affix the strips to the second and third cells in the pack. Step 8, and indeed I was correct. That is where the BMS is going to go. So here is a nice picture. Let me scooch this up and show the camera a little better. There's a picture of the layout of the BMS and our wiring diagram. So we are going to mount our BMS on the battery. Dennis wants us to orient the BMS so that the blue wire faces the nickel strip that correspond to the pack negative terminal. So there's our negative. See why I wanted to mark these things? This way we know which terminal is which. So we are going to put the BMS right here, and that's how we're going to mount it. Now he shows this in the instructions oriented like that, so we'll do that, but it's the same way. We're going to put these leads over toward the pack minus. So we're going to remove that and press it onto the tape. This is the orientation that Dennis is showing it in the picture, and that is the orientation that we have it in. All right, so we are ready to move on to, that was 8A. 8B, slide the black heat shrink tubing over the black BMS output wire. So we're going to do that. We're done with that little bag. We're going to put the heat shrink on this side, on this wire. So we've got the black heat shrink tubing over our black BMS wire. Cut off the very end of the black BMS negative output wire to make crimping easier. Strip off about 1 centimeter of silicone off the end of this wire and twist the strands to consolidate. All right, so we've got our wire cutters. We want to clip back about 1 centimeter is what Dennis said. We have stripped her back, and we're going to go on to page 13, step 11. Insert the twisted strands into the 30 amp power pole contact and crimp. Oh, look at that. That's just darn near perfect. And then that is crimped on there. You can see it's got a crimp on it, and a nice even square crimp that puts pressure on all sides of the wire. All right, so we've got that step done, and this is the black one. All right, and once you get that in there, you'll hear a click, and then this should not come off. And I mean, I'm not, trying to tear it apart, but I'm putting a fair amount of pressure on this, and I can feel the connector inside touching back and forth inside the housing here. So there is our negative lead done. So our next step, measure the blue BMS wire labeled B- to the pack negative flap and cut. This is our B-, it's blue, and to the pack negative flap. And remember our markings. So this is the pack negative flap right here. So that is where we want it to go, and I'm going to set it so that it ends up soldered just about like that. I love the smell of flux in the morning. It smells like ham radio. Okay, we've got that soldered on. So our next step is to connect the BMS leads wire bundle to the back of the BMS. So this is the leads wire bundle, that's this. And so that only goes in one way. We're going to mate it up in here. There's a little tab on the top of it, and that slides right in there. That slides right in there and clicks into place like so. All right, so now we've got our leads bundle. All right, guys, that's the end of part 2 of our build of the DenCo battery. And right up here, you can find a link to part 1 of our series. Stay tuned for part 3.